Venezuela has been a hot topic lately, so here's 23 things about Venezuela that would make us in the first world go into an absolute coma, explained by a chick that was raised in Venezuela herself. Let's get right into it.
Here are some things I experienced growing up in Venezuela that would send anyone from a first world country straight into therapy. A full tank of gas is cheaper than water. I always thought this is how it was everywhere, but no. However, you have to line up for a very long time, and by the time you get there, there may be no more gas left. At a country with the biggest reserves of oil in the world.
Socialism, baby. But that's also because, as she just said, Venezuela has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. So, of course, gas is going to be cheap. You also get this in, say, Saudi Arabia and Brunei. Brunei is a small country that I recently learned about that's also surprisingly rich in reserves, and their gas is also dirt cheap. So, yeah.
At one point, your ID number, the final number of your ID, would be the determining factor if you're allowed to shop in the supermarket that day or not. So, since my mother and I had different numbers, she would bring me with her and then we would be able to shop because my ID ended in the number that allowed us to buy milk that day. And there's also limited milk, like you cannot get as much milk as you want, you cannot get anything as much as you want back then. Everyone had two phones.
That is lockdown vibes. That is absolute lockdown vibes. So, we actually kind of experienced this during the early parts of lockdown, specifically with the toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and soap shortages. Now, obviously, we didn't have to do the government ID thing, but we all had to wait on super long lines into your local grocery store, and we had a limit on toilet papers and other toiletries. I'm getting flashbacks now, but this is a normal thing in Venezuela, meaning that this is ongoing, and because supplies are so scarce there, because of how isolated it is, thanks to sanctions and just thanks to a government that didn't care about its people. Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise that people are limited to how much milk they can buy, how much essential foods they can buy, as well as only being able to go on specific days based off of your last name or whatever government issued ID number you get. Like, that shit is wild. That alone would put me into a coma, that you have to schedule your visits and like coordinate with your family members to do something as simple as grocery shopping, which is very simple in the US, Europe, and other parts of the developed world, correct? So, yeah, absolutely crazy.
Phones, a real one and a decoy phone. The decoy phone is the one that you would go out to the streets with because if and when you get mugged, that's the one they're gonna take. So you leave the nice one at home. Going out after sun.
I mean, people are desperate, right? So, obviously, they're going to try and mug phones. So, I'm sure that the decoy phone was probably some just bullshit flip phone. Like, I'm sure they were carrying they're still carrying razors around, Motorola razors. Remember those? I had a razor myself, but it's 2026 and they're still carrying razors around just in case they get mugged, or even a sidekick. Sidekicks, those were the shit. God, I miss sidekicks. Even though I never had one myself, they looked so goddamn cool.
Set on foot, out of the question. I would like to live. Going out to walk after nighttime, not a thing. Do not do that. I've been mugged 3 times.
Oh,
Mind
there you
you,
go.
I lived there until I was 16 years old, okay? 3 times. Gunpoint. Also, if you get
Oof.
robbed at night because you were walking around, that's just natural selection. No one's gonna feel bad for you. They're gonna be like, why were you walking alone at night? Duh. They would steal your groceries.
Depending on where you are in the US, that's actually kind of a normal thing here too. Depending on which neighborhood, which city, you have to watch out at night in most parts of the US, especially as a lady. So the US is not too different from that. So if you're from the US, you're not really going to get a coma. But if you're from, say, Europe or even Canada, that might put you in a coma. That might be a little bit of a shock to you. But us Americans, we're fucking used to that shit.
By the way, those were luxury items. Kids I went to school with got kidnapped for ransom. It was actually very
Ah,
common.
trafficking.
And I talk about it like this because it's just a thing that, yeah, ransom. Like, Yeah, I didn't know what it was to eat cereal with milk for years. That was a very foreign concept to me because there was no milk. The milk is for the babies, so don't waste the milk that we can't get on some cereal. If your family
Oh yeah, because milk is so scarce. Because if you remember from her earlier point, you couldn't buy, you were limited in how much milk you could buy. So yeah, it's not really worth wasting it on cereal, especially if you have children to take care of. But really, I don't mind raw dogging cereal. I think it's perfectly fine to raw dog cereal. Personally, to me, that's not weird. But if you've made it this far so far, how do you feel about raw dogging your cereal? I can't be alone here. I can't be the weird one. That wouldn't put me in a coma if I was forced to eat cereal without milk.
had the opportunity to travel abroad, the souvenirs you would ask for were toothpaste, soap, shampoo, luxury items. There was a time where also
Wait, toothpaste is a luxury item? God damn. It's probably like that in most of the third world too, actually. No wonder why so many people who are in these developing countries or third world or whatever you want to call it have such crappy teeth because they don't even have access to toothpaste, so they can't regularly brush their teeth. And I'm sure flossing is a luxury too that we take for granted here in the first world. It's crazy how so many people neglect to floss their teeth here in the US or in any other part of the developed world, right? Could be Canada, Europe. And so many people are too lazy to floss their teeth. But that's actually a privilege that a lot of us take for granted just simply because, well, most people in these lesser fortunate countries don't even have the choice to floss their teeth. Like they're forced to not floss their teeth. And when I see people traveling to like Africa or some impoverished Southeastern Asian country, a lot of the teeth are fucked up. And I've always wondered why that's the case, but that's probably why, is because things like toothpaste, floss, and mouthwash, they're probably so hard to come by. God. And it must feel so shitty not being able to brush your teeth. Because I know that when I skip one session, I already feel shitty, especially if I skip my morning session after going to sleep and have the morning breath. That shit feels nasty.
soda was 0 calories because we had no sugar to produce for the sodas. It's not like we cared about health, there was just no sugar. Cereal boxes lost color.
That's actually kind of a win. If the sodas have no calorie or no sugar, they're forced to have 0 calorie sodas, so less obesity. Maybe sugar and soda should be banned here in the States. Just saying, just saying, just saying.
Because the ink was too expensive. So all you had was these carton colored cereal boxes for a very long time. Kids
Very Soviet, yes, very Soviet communism, socialist vibes. That's a little too socialist for me.
in elementary school would talk about the government. You learn about the situation since you are very little because that's all you know. That's all I have ever known. So you are discussing politics and the elections with everyone when you're 7 years old. The first attraction you
That's how dictatorships stay in power, though. They have to keep the children as indoctrinated as possible. So that means learning about politics before you even get into elementary school. How crazy is that?
went to when traveling abroad was not a monument, was not a landmark, it was a supermarket. And you took pictures because you couldn't believe the amount of food. Not even fancy food, just food. Lots of it. If this sounds unreal to you, it's because it shouldn't be. And that's why we're happy. That's why we celebrate. Here are
I'd say a few of these we're already used to as Americans. Can't speak for Europe, Canada, or Japan, Korea, or whatever, but as Americans, we can actually relate on some of those. Now, that's just 13, so here's the other nine.
Of course,
She has a
here
part
are
2.
some more things I experienced growing up in Venezuela that would send anyone from a first world country straight into therapy. Part 2. McDonald's had no fries because potatoes were too expensive to import, so instead of fries, we had yuca fries. And honestly, this may be
Put the fries in the bag. Psych. We got none. We got socialism out of our French fries.
a blessing in disguise because they actually were pretty good. However,
I'm not a big fan of yuca fries personally. I think they're too thick. I prefer my fries thin and crispy. That's why I'm also not a fan of In-N-Out fries, unless you ask for well done. But if you don't ask for well done, then they come out all soggy and shit. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like yuca fries are just too thick for me.
A bunch of people wanted to get french fries, you can't. Made in socialism stickers. I don't know why the government decided that it would be a good idea. Products were labeled made in socialism like it was a brand or a warning for every product that was made in the country, which we didn't have many at that point. Chavez's eyes.
That sounds like part of the indoctrination, though. That's why they have made in socialism stickers, because they're trying to get people addicted to socialism as early as possible. That's how the Soviet Union lasted as long as it did. That's how socialist China lasted as long as it did. That's how North Korea is still a thing too, because North Korea drills this in as early as like 4 years old for some of these kids, where they're already talking about politics and whatever and saying how socialism is the best thing since sliced bread. Even though, you know, most of these socialist countries, they either fall apart or they're broke as shit. But yeah.
Were painted everywhere. Walls, buildings, highways, anything you can think of. Just in case you forgot that he was there and that he was watching. The government slogan.
That's literally North Korea right there with the portraits of the Kims. Oh, God.
Was Patria, Socialismo o Muerte, which translates to motherland, socialism, or death. This also was a message that was painted everywhere, and you can see it everywhere you go. You could be watching TV at any
This really is the North Korea of Latin America, or it was, until Maduro got yanked away.
point of the day on your national channel, and then this would come up. That is because Chavez wanted to talk, and this is a mandatory national broadcast, which in Spanish we call cadena nacional.
Oh my
He would talk
God.
for hours with no warning, no end time. You don't know. He just had things to say. I think Chavez really wanted to be.
That's absolute North Korea vibes. Now, I just thought of this, but what if the US did the same invasion on North Korea as they did to Venezuela? Imagine what would happen if the US were to successfully kidnap Kim Jong Un and bring him into prison, into the same New York prison that Maduro, Diddy, SBF, and now Takashi 69 are all in. How fucking crazy would that be? That would be like some Avengers type shit right there. Like, holy shit. But I'm sure China would not be pleased, because the only reason why the North Korean regime is still around is simply because of China, and China is pretty powerful. So, yeah, that would be very tough to go after North Korea. Not only that, but because these North Koreans are so brainwashed, if Kim Jong Un would get kidnapped or whatever, that would make him into a martyr because of how closed off the information is in North Korea. Whereas in Venezuela, people were still getting access to information from the outside world, which is why they were celebrating. But if you were to repeat this in North Korea, it would go very differently. Another person would take control, obviously, but that new person would still continue the Kim agenda because of how closed off the information is. So I guess the only way these socialist regimes could survive is if they're just completely isolated, as North Korea is. But because Venezuela had access to the internet and had access to outside information, that's why they're celebrating. But those North Korean citizens, they wouldn't celebrate if Kim Jong-un just were to simply get yoinked away.
Be a podcaster, but that is just my theory. Freedom of speech was really not a thing, so we had our main channel that was shut down, RCTV, Picture. I would say SNL, but not really. They would do skits, but also news, soap operas, entertainment, but they were very vocal about how against the government they were, and they would do skits about the government, and, well, shut down. I learned how to protect myself against tear gas at a very young age because I was going to protest as a child, and here are my credentials. Whenever we had protests, the government would hire mercenaries as backup for the National Guard because the National Guard wasn't enough for all of these people. They had to hire these mercenaries to dissipate the crowds. Chavez would go around farmlands and look at one and say, that's not yours anymore. Expropriate it. Next one, expropriate it.
Socialism.
Not yours, belongs to the government now. And people would clap for it, by the way. This is what I grew up with. Of course.
Socialism, baby. Now, that's only 22 if you've been keeping count. But where's 23? Up, I'm going to show you. It's coming up. Boop.
You gotta be some.
Venezuelans have a degree in being gaslit. This is the final and 23rd thing about Venezuela that would put us into a coma. Buckle up for gaslighting, which is another hot word.
One with a lot of balls and a lot of privilege to try to explain Venezuela to Venezuelans. Let me tell you something. If there's something that Venezuelans are used to for our whole lives is being gaslit, and first by the government and everybody, and now from you guys. And it's fine. Listen, I left Venezuela when I was 16 years old, and I lived in Mexico, and the people in Mexico were trying to explain Venezuela to me. So don't worry, it's not just the Americans and it's not just the rest of the world. This is something that we have had to live with ever since we left Venezuela, and having people on the country that we arrived to telling us that it's not as bad as we make it seem. They try to tell us that every single country goes through things, and I'm like, man, I remember moving to Mexico and thinking that it was the freaking promised land. You can tell me that Mexico is unsafe or whatever, but I felt like I was in the States. I felt when I arrived to Mexico, I felt that I was like in the peak of the world. No lo vas a entender, ni tampoco te lo voy a explicar. Just kidding, I will explain it to you, because that's all we can do. All that Venezuelans can do right now is put out our experience and what we lived, and if people don't want to listen, well, it's fine, because no one has listened to us ever. You gotta be someone with a...
Girl, you gotta put down the vape. It's not good for you. I saw that. But anyways, it's crazy how perspective works, right? Because to her, Mexico was the promised land, but then a lot of Mexicans try to come to the US because that is their promised land. So imagine, how crazy is that? That you have like Venezuelans, Colombians, and all that migrating to Mexico because it's a huge step up, and it's similar to how Mexicans will try to get into the US. How fucking wild is that? Like how everything can be so vastly different based on where you spawn into in life. Absolutely mind-blowing. Catch you on the next one.